Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this cold Wednesday in November. For those that are joining live, or watching the recording and you've been with us before, thank you for coming back. I'm sure you know those that have been following us, you can see this is a new and fresh topic that we will be discussing outside of mental health. But for those that this is your first time tuning in, thank you and welcome. So my name is Cassandra Francis. I am the founder as well as one of the psychotherapists at the practice. And today we have our one and only holistic nutritionist, Sean Hugh Wing, who will be presenting on getting fit with nutrition. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat. If you have any questions and you're watching the recorded version, please feel free to use the comment section and we'll definitely respond to you. So I'll give it to you, Sean.
Well, first of all, thank you for everybody who's joining or everyone who will be watching this. As Cassandra said, my name is Sean Hewing, and I'm a holistic nutritionist. Just recently joined with One Piece Therapy, so I'm hoping that the information I give is helpful to you and that you can have some good takeaways for you. I know when it comes to getting fit, that can come in a variety of different ways. It doesn't just have to be with weight training. It could be joining a team for like extracurricular sport. It could be just cycling, running. There's so many different ways of activity, but every activity does have a nutritional component to it, I'd say. And with that, let's start the presentation. So the first thing I think is important when we're talking about nutrition and fitness, and like as I said before, fitness can be any activity that you find yourself in. Is what we need to do is we need to figure out like eating based on what you're training for. So the idea is that we need to first ask yourself, what is my goal? Are you training for a marathon? Are you trying to get stronger? Are you trying, to train for a team sport, or maybe you're just trying to lose some extra weight that you've gained through the COVID years, we'll call it. Second thing is we should be creating a measurable goal, and it's really important to create this measurable goal because one, that is what's going to challenge you. Often as people, we will start something, but we don't follow through. And creating a measurable goal is something that will give you that motivation as well as something that you can work towards. And when it comes to me working with anybody, I'm always a big fan and proponent of small steps to get to the bigger goal. That's very huge. So, for instance, some examples of measurable goals would be like, for instance, for a marathon, it might be getting your getting that personal best for your finishing time. For weight training, it might be completing like 3 clean sets on a squat rack at a specific weight. It could be even just making that team and making that starting lineup, or it could be reaching a specific weight, as I said. Defining your goal in this manner allows you to determine what you should be eating, B, how much you should be eating, and C, when you should be eating. A common occurrence that I see in many people is that assuming that you should just eat the way you always have, but a specific goal will tailor your nutrition needs to match your desired outcome. For a proper amount of nutrition second thing is proper amount of nutrition is necessary to fuel an active lifestyle. What I mean by that is quite simply this. When you're training, it is important to remember that you need extra fuel in terms of food for the energy that you're expending while training. This kind of goes back to what I was saying before, that in the sense that people, they start being active, but they maintain the same eating principles and habits that they were before. And sometimes especially if you end up training a lot, this can lead to you not having the correct amount or consuming the improper type of fuel. For instance, if you have fast food or ultra processed foods, and it can lead to poor performance, injury, or even illness. Calories versus weight loss. So this is probably a big one. And this idea is that burning calories does not immediately equate to a reduction of body fat. And I think a lot of people can probably understand this. Like, if you've ever been to the gym and you're like, okay, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to lift some weights or do this fitness class, but you don't really start seeing that the fat's going away for whatever reason, or you're losing those extra pounds. And the reason is this: it's because when energy is needed, like, so when you're doing any activity and energy is required, it can come from different sources, and that depends on the intensity of the effort. So the more intense an effort or workout is, the faster the body needs that energy. And this means that the body will grab, typically when it needs energy quickly, it'll grab energy or calories from muscle. Because what happens is your muscles actually store carbohydrates that you consume as glycogen. Also, for instance, what this means is that for instance, like if you were doing a 100-meter sprint, your body's not going to grab energy from the fat that's in the system, but it's going to grab it from, like, the muscles, I said, because at that point, you need the energy right away. And for the body to convert or to burn the calories away from the fat, it takes a certain amount of time. So in activities that require lower intensity, such as bike rides, long runs, and that lasts up to about 20 minutes or longer, the body is able then to begin converting energy from fat. And that's probably why you see sometimes when, like, I'm sure if you see marathon runners, they're you notice that they have their body composition is very thin, usually. Like, you don't ever typically see like a sprinter body on a marathon run, even though they're both running, right? And that's because over the long term, their body is grabbing that additional energy that they need to carry out the running from the fat, as opposed grabbing it from the muscle.
Right. And I think you're about to go to your next point, Sean, but this is very interesting for me. So I'm curious then, how do you think the misconception that like calories would result in like lesser calories would result in weight loss? Because we do typically tend to focus on that component when we
That's a great question. So I mean, my professional opinion is that I think people think that when they think calories, they think fat. That's the automatic that's their first conclusion, is that extra calories means that that means it's extra fat, but that's not how the body looks at it. Like, calories comes from an excess of food, and food is broken into three things, which we will touch upon later on, right? But it's broken into carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. That's basically where calories come from. So when you have an excess amount of calories, basically what happens is that typically what happens is the carbohydrates get turned into fat for later use, or for use at a later time.
Okay, thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. I'm excited to continue.
I hope so. Okay. My next point then would be the anaerobic versus aerobic exercise. And I'm sure some people might have heard of this term. So anaerobic means basically that these are basically exercise that do not require oxygen. And aerobic is exercise that requires oxygen. So this might be a little confusing for people. So hopefully if you get to rewatch, you'll get a better understanding of what I'm saying. So in anaerobic exercises, you require the energy faster than the oxygen can be supplied. So this means this is where your heart rate is going to reach like 80% of its maximum, its maximum rate. So like when your heart is like beating, pounding, 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 and you can feel like if you're ever sprinting, you're ever running or doing something that really exerts a lot of energy, your heart rate starts going faster. And that when that happens, your body is grabbing energy not from the oxygen that you're breathing in, right? Because what happens is there's a process that when you breathe the oxygen in, energy is created through the oxygen um, molecules. Like, so oxygen is burnt, and then from that process, energy is created. And I don't want to get into the science of it because I think I'll lose a lot of people. But the idea is that in anaerobic, you're not using oxygen to get energy. You're grabbing energy from, once again, your muscles, because that's where it's stored, and you can grab it quickly. A great example of this is if you've ever been like really working out hard, and you find it when you find it hard or almost not possible at all to have a conversation with somebody. So like, for instance, if you're sprinting, people who are sprinting are not typically talking to people beside, like, right? That is a good example of your heart rate just beating because you're not using any oxygen, right? So what's good about these types of exercises is that they're great for increasing strength. Examples of this would be high intensity interval training, which is called HIIT, as some of you might know. Weightlifting or other resistance training kind of falls into the anaerobic exercises. For aerobic exercises, and now this is where the body is actually using oxygen for energy, this is typically where your heart rate is below that 80% of its maximum rate, and you can basically have a conversation, or you're heavy breathing, but you can still converse with somebody, right? And those would be in activities such as like jogging or running, cycling or swimming. What typically you see is most fitness plans typically incorporate both of these exercises to reach your goal. And it's very important to understand that. Even people who are doing marathon running can benefit from strength training, right? And it's always good to, whether it's in how you approach fitness or how you approach nutrition, to expand what you're doing, right? Variety, as we all know, is the spice of life, basically, right? Like that is really what the body's looking for. So it's when you combine these two types of exercises, it's easier to reach that goal that you've set for yourself. You're gonna say so?
No, continue. I could say something before we change slides.
I was just about to change the slide. So.
Oh, okay. So let me. Okay.
Yeah.
So as much as you're talking about physical health, of course, it's so interesting to just hear how you break down setting up your fitness goals. Is literally a model that we use in mental health and psychotherapy goals, which is the SMART goal. Have you heard of that?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So it's really, our bodies, our minds and our bodies are so connected to, even we use the same approach to get different results, right? So I'm just really fascinated of, like this is actually making sense to me. Of course, fitness is more so my experience than it is my expertise.
Yeah.
But I'm aligning in this conversation.
That's great. No, well, I mean, because it's very important that, I mean, how many of us have started something, but we just, we go and we're very, we buy into it for like the first few weeks, and then we just kind of peter off, right?
Right.
And the idea of using the SMART goal method, right, is the same idea. Is we want to continue that motivation, right? We want to make sure that we see that we're moving towards something that we've set a goal for. And the idea is that you hit that goal and then you create another goal, right? And this is the only way that we create that habit, right? Because it's really habits what SMART Goals is trying to do. We're trying to create positive habits to help us reach our ultimate goals.
Right. So it can become a lifestyle.
Exactly. Yes, definitely. Yeah. So macronutrients are, just like I explained before, we have our carbohydrates, we have our proteins, and we have our fats. And all of them are important. There's no bad guy here. And I think that's another thing that, unfortunately, whether through media or however we've learned this, is that there's always a culprit. Like some people are like, oh, carbohydrates are bad, I don't want them. Oh, too much protein is bad, I'll get gout. Oh, fat is bad because I'll gain weight. But the truth is that all foods, regardless of what you eat, contain all three of these things, right? So even when you're having a sirloin steak, it's got a carbohydrate, a percentage of its carbohydrate. Most of it's protein, which is why it's considered a protein, and then it's still got fats, right? In terms of carbohydrates, though, some examples would be fruits, vegetables, grains, and legumes. Carbohydrates are used to store carbohydrates are stored in muscle as glycogen, as I noted before, and it's basically the most readily available source of energy that we have, which is why we love it. Like our bodies are attuned to really quickly digest and absorb carbohydrates, because one, we need it for our bodies, and two, carbohydrate is the only fuel that is used for our brain. So fats and protein, we can't use that to fuel our brain. We need carbohydrates. Okay. Typically, you're going to get typically a person will probably get about 40 to 70% of their daily energy from carbohydrates.
Okay, so I guess that makes sense then why there's, I don't know who's saying it, but let's just call them
Yes.
they, that they say to not eat carbs towards bedtime, because I guess it will just build on your energy and not provide that rest that you need going into sleep.
So that is true, and that can, there's two opposing thoughts on that. I guess it's in more along the lines of when are you eating and when are you going to sleep, right? So having carbs before bed is not necessarily bad. And depending on how you train, like if, for instance, people who are like athletes or people who are doing heavy training, it's not a bad thing to have carbs like maybe about an hour before they go to bed, right? Because carbs are used to basically, the carbs are used broken down, and they help to restore and regenerate muscle tissue, right? As well as any proteins. But I think one of the things is that, like you just said, whoever they are is that they look at carbs and like, well, I'm just gonna gain weight, and then we also have to look at what type of carbs are we having, right? Are we having like starchy carbs? Are we having non-starchy carbs? So starchy carbs would be like foods that are found in like pastas, potatoes, potatoes, like sweet potatoes. Those would be starchy carbs. Non-starchy carbs are typically those found in fruits and vegetables.
Okay, so the ones we tend to like more, the ones that are more addictive are the starchy ones.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Like rice, for instance, like white rice is a great example. That would be a starch, right? That's a starchy carb.
Right.
Yeah. But the importance of having carbohydrates in your nutrition for all types of training is important because one, like it's important, as I noted, for muscle and brain function. It helps with your immune system, and it helps with muscle regrowth due to carbs being stored in your muscle as glycogen, right? So we want to put that energy back into our system, right? Especially when we're training. So for those people who are exercising 4 to 5 times a week, right? Who they need to have those carbs back in their system. And the idea that you can have one big large meal like right after your workout, and this will like refill your glycogen source, is actually not true, right? It actually takes about 20 to 22 hours to completely restore your glycogen stores. So what this means is that if you don't have the glycogen needed in your muscles when you go to work out the next day, your performance goes down, right? So we actually need that time to put back that energy back into our muscles. Okay. Then there's also the idea of and some people might have heard about this, of high glycemic index foods and low glycemic index foods. And basically what it is the glycemic index is a system that rates how fast a particular food, a carbohydrate, will increase your blood sugar level, right? Foods that are considered high glycemic index would be those that are 70 or higher on the glycemic index rate. Some examples of that would be like dried fruits. Another example would be cooked carrots would be another example. Rice obviously would be high in the glycemic index, and even some cereals. Most cereals actually would probably be like cereals in a box cereals usually typically fall under the high glycemic index. Anything between 69 to 56 on the glycemic index is considered medium, and then anything under 55 is low. Now, just because something's high on the glycemic index does not necessarily mean it's bad for you to eat. It actually can be good. It's all about timing. So after you have a workout or you do your training of whatever it is, having a high glycemic food is typically a good time to have it. So for instance, if you want to have fries or a baked potato, that would be a good time to have that, to consume that, because your body wants that quick, wants to refill the glycogen that's being lost in your muscles at that time. There's also another belief that as soon as you work out, you have to go and eat. So, and this is considered like this is window that people have. Now, this is not necessarily true, and actually, how it works is that the window is actually much longer than people realize. But what happens is that within the first few hours following a workout is the time when the body will grab or will convert carbohydrates to glycogen and then put it into your muscles. Okay? And that's typically best done when you also have a protein with it. When you're talking about how much carbs that you want to eat, if it's a training day, you're looking at probably about 6 to 10 grams per kilogram, right? And the reason why there's a range is because it depends on what you're training for. So like, once again, it's back at that goal, right? Different activities are going to require you to have more carbs. So for instance, if you're an ultramarathon runner, you're going to require more carbs than somebody who's just doing weight training, right? And then on days that you're not training, you should probably be aiming for about 4 grams per kilogram, right? And you'll notice that it's per kilogram. And the reason why is that every body is unique in itself, right? So I might require more carbs or higher amount of carbs than you, Cassandra, right? Like, because I might weigh more, you might weigh more, depending on what of our activities. How much effort do I need for my activity compared to how much effort you need for your activity? When we talk about proteins are good for muscle growth and tissue repair. Now there are two types of proteins. We have animal proteins, and they also have non-animal proteins. Animal proteins are, as you said, as you can believe, exactly, Will, right? You can have for animal proteins, you can have chicken, beef, fish, etc. Non-animal are legumes, which are typically chickpeas, kidney beans, white beans, lentils. Will looks like he's having a hard time here. And then also for a non-animal would be tofu or tempeh, for instance. Those are just examples. In terms of proteins, we need that for muscle regeneration, whether we're building muscle for in terms of weight training or for repairing muscle. And that would be like, for instance, people who are doing endurance training, right? So proteins are necessary for both people, right? For both types of athletes here. When you're thinking about how much proteins you need, you're looking at probably, in terms of training, 1.2 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram. Once again, okay. So typically, the person who isn't training, who's very inactive, right? What you probably would need 0.8 grams. That's the guideline people usually go by. 0.8 grams per kilogram is basically the baseline. But when you're training, it's usually about 1.2 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram. Okay. And also, it's important for people who are vegetarians to realize that you can still get your proteins from non-animal based proteins. But what's really important is that you make sure that you have a variety of food when you're trying to get protein from non-animal sources. And the reason why is because there are certain essential amino acids that we need, which is what we get from proteins. And typically, animal protein has all the essential amino acids, but non-animal proteins do not have all the essential proteins. So what we do is we food combine, and that's how we are able to get our all the essential proteins that we need. Sorry, all the essential amino acids that we need. When we talk about fats, however, now it's necessary to understand that fats are good for us. And fats are important because we actually need fats to absorb certain vitamins. So for those who might not know, vitamin A, vitamin K, vitamin E are all fat-based vitamins. And we need fats in our system, so we need to consume fats to absorb these vitamins. Without it, we can't absorb it. And that would therefore leave us at a deficiency. Fats are also needed for hormonal balance too. So by hormonal balance, I'm talking about testosterone, estrogen. We need this in our systems, right? Because if we don't get fats in our system, one, we can't create hormones, and then two, we can't transport these hormones to wherever we need them. And then lastly, fats are needed for cell membrane construction. Okay. Fats also are important for providing energy for low intensity efforts. And one thing that I want to let people understand is that sweat has little to do with fat reduction. I repeat, sweat has little to do with fat reduction. So no matter how much you're sweating does not necessarily mean you're burning off fat any faster. Okay.
So what would you say sweat is related to? Like, is it just like body heat, or what is?
Definitely, it's you need to sweat because you're trying to control your internal core, right? It's like, for instance, when people get sick from heat stroke, their core has just gone up too high, right? So we sweat to keep our body in homeostasis, right? We want our bodies to be at a certain temperature, which is why, like, when you get sick, you notice that it's only a couple, like 1 or 2 degrees higher than the 75 degrees that we require, puts us in a state of illness, right? Just like when we drop 1 or 2 degrees lower, then we start to go into hypothermia. That small range is really important, and so we sweat basically to cool ourselves off, right?
Okay, because I know sometimes for me, I feel like I'm not really doing anything if I'm not sweating. And for me, it takes me a while to work up a sweat. Like even in a sauna, it takes me a while. So I'm like, okay, something, I feel like I just have to work harder to get it. But now I'm realizing, I guess I measure like how intense is my workout, like how effective actually is my workout according to how much I'm sweating.
But what you're saying is true though. Like, I mean, a higher effort will lead to you sweating more because your body's going to go through the water that is in the system, right? So the thing is that when we're working out a lot, right, we are also releasing more toxins into our system, right? So when we release toxins, we need the water to basically push the toxins out into our bloodstream. It picks it up and goes into our liver or liver or kidney to basically to clean out our system, right? So
Right.
we're sweating, one, to move the toxins out of our system, right? And then two, also to control our body temperature. Okay. So the idea is that it's not that it's if it takes you long to build up a sweat, that you're not working out hard, or that you're not working out. But the idea is the misunderstanding I wanted to address is that you sweating does not have anything to do with you losing fat, right? Which is what a lot of people think. They're like, oh, I sweated a lot, so therefore, I must have burned off a lot of calories.
Absolutely.
Once again, yeah,
That's motivating.
exactly, right? But once again, it comes down back to what I was saying, that like when we are having high effort activities, it's not necessarily that we're burning fat, right? We're burning energy, right? But where are we getting this energy from? Typically, when you get that high sweat, it's usually going to be probably from your muscles, right? From the glycogen that's stored in your muscles.
But just before we move on to the next slide, I've seen so much memes where it's like, we go to the gym, we're pumping, we're doing cardio, we're doing so much things, and we expect results the same the same day in the mirror, right? There's so much times where you see those memes where people just, they're posing thinking after they did 10 or 100 squats, then everything will be firm. But yeah, there's so much you're breaking down that, of course, if you're not even in this field or informed about your nutritional health, you're not even considering what means what and what needs to be in place for this. And, yeah, it's so much depth.
Yeah. You bring up an interesting point, though, because I think in terms of weight training, or I guess even running, or anytime you're doing it, you're exerting a lot of energy. One thing, though, that I've heard, like, especially I think they mentioned this on Huberman with Dr. Andy Gelfer, I believe his name. It's like when you're exercising, it's one of the, like, so when you're weight training and like you see people posing, the thing is, like, that pose is basically what your body can become, right? So you're right in that, like, in that moment, sure, eventually it'll fade off. That the blood will stop pumping from your muscles, and then you'll kind of like go back into your state. But in that instance, when you're after you finish that heavy workout, you can actually see what your body will become, provided that you continue working out, right? And that is motivation for some people, right? That's what people sometimes need. That like, oh, this is what I can look like, kind of thing. It's kind of like what, like, like we talk about AI these days, right? Like, you can type, I'm sure there's programs where you can type in, like, what would I look like if I was 20 pounds lighter, right? You can see, like, this transformation. And that's the same thing that you can get when you're in the gym, for instance. So yeah, you're right, like, in the sense that it does take work to get to where you're trying to get, but you have that glimpse of what I can reach and what I can attain if I continue on this path.
Nice. And I think even going back to the first slide of aligning with your goals, right? Like, once you're able to check point along the way of what you're working towards and have that immediate feedback, absolutely, that's motivational.
Yeah. And I mean, you can probably talk about this even more, because, like, there's just that dopamine kick kind of comes back, like, you, in sense, like, you get that, like, that almost that instant gratification, like, oh my gosh, this is what I can look like, right? And then that can spur on more motivation, like, oh, like, I can do this, I can keep on doing this, right? So yeah.
Absolutely. This creates the lifestyle, right? Is
Yeah,
when we are continuously not only checking in with ourselves, but just being committed to the process of reaching our goals, then it becomes a lifestyle because you feel good. And of course, everyone wants to feel good. Everyone wants to feel fulfilled.
yeah,
And that does take focus to and intention to get there for
right.
sure.
As we move on to micronutrients, I think a lot of us overlook micronutrients, especially when it comes to training. I think a lot of us just look at our macros, like, that's all we ever hear typically. Like if you're on popular media, it's like, how many proteins you're getting, how much fat you're getting, how much, carbs you're getting. But micronutrients are very important. And the reason why they're important is because micronutrients basically are the vitamins and the minerals that you need that are essential for your life, right? We can't live off just proteins, fats, and carbs. We'll die, right? Or we'll be very sick in the process. Is probably better. Like, like we get energy from vitamin B, right? Those are micronutrients, right? We without vitamin B, we don't have the energy to move. Like vitamin B is the gasoline for our mitochondria, which basically is the engine for our cells, right? We can't do anything without it. Magnesium we need probably, for whether it's blood sugar or stuff like iron we need because we have to transport oxygen and we need the oxygen to burn our fat, to have blood flowing and to give us, to give us that energy to do anything. So really what we're trying to do is that when we're trying to get micronutrients, the idea is that we need to actually have a variety in our diet, right? Like we need to grab not just foods that are processed. So like people will be like, okay, well, I'll just have a protein shake. Well, protein shakes aren't full of micronutrients. They're full of proteins, right? Some carbs. But we really need these vitamins to basically to help our body to function, right? And these these vitamins or the micronutrients support our health and are needed to prevent whether deficiencies or declines in our health, right? Another thing is that as I said, when we're looking for these nutrients, we're trying to look in dense, like foods that have, dense caloric foods. And those are typically found in vegetables and fruits. So like whether it's broccoli, kale, like cruciferous vegetables, maybe it's carrots, peas, string beans, apples, peaches, all those types of fruits and vegetables is what we're going to grab for, or where we're going to get our micronutrients from. So those vitamins and the minerals that we need to, continue us having let us continue us having a performing at that level that we want. Because one thing that we need to understand is that when we're training, right, we're grabbing nutrients from the food that we eat. So if we don't have enough, if we're not eating enough, we're not replenishing these nutrients, and that can lead to us getting ill, right? And the last thing you want to do is when you're training is to get ill, because then that sets us back, right? Because I mean, I'm sure people know that, when you go to the gym, say on day one, and then you take off 2 weeks, it's the gains that you made on that day one or those first couple of weeks decline over time if we're not continuously training. That's how it is with anything. I mean, maybe not at that speed or level, but I mean, like for instance, if you were learning a language and you don't use that language after a couple of years, well, it's harder to use that language because our brain, our muscle, right, hasn't been using it, right? So it's kind of like use it or lose it kind of thing. And as we get older, especially that happens, right? So once again, it's very important to continue to eat these nutrient-dense vegetables and fruits. Now, the idea is also that, well, Sean, can I get the same thing from taking a supplement? So now, this is where I think a lot of people they haven't thought it through. So now, when I take a supplement, right? Say I'm taking, I'll use an easy one. vitamin C. So now, if I get vitamin C from say an orange that people realize that a lot of vitamin C is in, there are also other minerals that are in that orange that lets our body convert that vitamin C, right? People think that I can just take this one supplement and then that will replace that fruit or vegetable that I'm having, but they don't realize how much, like, the matrix that is that this vegetable, this fruit, is made up of to get that one mineral. Like, we think that we take that one mineral and we're just gonna and then that's enough. But there's so many other things that are in that fruit or vegetable that we don't recognize, that help us to convert that mineral so that we can use it.
That's a great point, because I was actually going to ask you one of those questions of, I had a feeling what you would say as a nutritionist, but still the question, is like, how good are vitamins and supplements to take outside of, getting the nutrients from the direct source of an orange, for example? But that makes a lot of sense in the composition, right? Talking about holistic hair and health. An orange in itself is already whole. So it does come with components that can boost the vitamin that we need, right? So versus, I guess then they're just taking a vitamin C supplement, as direct as it is, like, how well is that being facilitated through the system, essentially?
Right. I mean, it is. Don't get me wrong, supplements are good, but remember, they're supplements, right? That the word supplements means in addition to, right? Right. We don't take them solely, right? Because there's other things that are factored into like, how well is this supplement bioavailable to us, right? In terms of bioavailability, is like, how well can our system use it, right? I mean, there's so many things that go into an orange. Like, there's the fiber that you get from eating the orange, right? Whether it's eating the orange skin or the pulp that's in the actual fruit of that fruit. So those are things that we really have to consider, that when we're talking about, supplement versus having a whole food. And there's also the idea that supplements are good, but supplements, like everything in the body, are better when there's a deficiency. So, for instance, when you're deficient in something, the supplements are going to be, your body's going to want them more, so they'll grab it quicker, right? Now, when the body does it, so when you don't necessarily need it, the body's not as apt to grab that supplement because it doesn't need it, right? Our body, for lack of a better term, is lazy. Actually, it's not lazy. Let's not say it's not lazy. It's efficient. We want to use the quickest thing available to us in that time, right? So for instance, and this is kind of the reason why sometimes people they look at hard work and like, oh, well, I'd rather just do the easier thing, because our body's kind of like, we want to use the least amount of energy, right? So if we have two things and one's going to take more energy, our body will typically say, let's do the one that uses the least amount of energy, because we use energy for so many things, right? We want to be efficient with how we use it. In terms of hydration, hydration is very important in terms of training. And the idea is that you probably want to have about 1 fluid ounce of liquid. Typically, water is best, to 1 kilogram daily. That's the goal. And I know some people don't get that amount. Some people feel that they don't get thirsty. Also, we get hydration from the foods that we eat, right? So if we're eating lots of fruits and vegetables, we're going to get hydration from that, right? You'll get hydration from some of the meats that you eat, because there's water stored in that food, right? Typically, anything that hasn't been dehydrated, you'll have water in it, right? But it's still good to get about that 1-to-1 ratio. In terms of working out, you want to rehydrate your system about 8 to 12 hours after an intense workout, right? And that's just basically getting the waters in to flush out the toxins that get released when we start burning off, whether it's the fats, because typically toxins get stored in our fats. So we want to flush our system out, right? And also to replenish water, because when glycogen is being used, we need to put water back into our muscles, right? Because muscles typically made up probably, I think, about 70, 80% of your muscle is made up of water, right? So that's why we want to put water back into our system. And then when we're working out, you typically want to be drinking, at least sipping is usually a good idea, sipping throughout the workout, right? And for about every 20 minutes, you're typically looking at about 200 to 300 milliliters of water to replenish any water that you've lost during that workout.
So I'm curious if that would only be pertaining to if you're losing water, assuming you're sweating a lot, right? What if you're not sweating that much? Then would you still recommend 20 minutes? Every 20 minutes.
I'd probably reduce it. I would probably reduce it if you feel that you don't sweat as much, because typically the amount that we sweat is going to dictate how much water we should be drinking during our workout. So you're like yourself, you say it takes you a while before you start sweating. So probably you having less water would probably be ideal.
Right. Okay. Is there such thing, because a lot of people, I forgot what it's called, but people have developed this phobia of being dehydrated, right? So I'm curious if there is such thing as being
overhydrated.
Overhydrated, yes.
So yes, but it would typically mean that you're drinking a lot. You'd have to drink a lot of water, right? Because what's usually going to happen is that when you drink too much water, you're going to get rid of the excess water, right? We will urinate and pee it out, basically, right? So can you have too much water? You could have too much water, but honestly, you would have to drink a lot of water, I would say. And most people are not drinking that much water.
Okay.
Right? So you're talking like liters upon liters upon liters of water a day.
Throughout the day.
Yeah. And that's liters of water where you're not working out. Like you're just like basically consuming water. Like as a person would consume food, you're consuming water.
Right. And very passive. Like, of course, you're moving as you walk in your day, but you're not working out. You're just living.
Yeah. So yes. So you could be overhydrated, but honestly, like I said, it would take a lot of water, a lot of drinking water.
Okay.
Yeah. And then it would mean that you're somehow not having the ability, whether through hormonal dysfunction or you're not just forcing yourself not to go to the bathroom, for you to have those ill effects.
Right. Yeah, that gets into a whole other aspect of now we're talking into mental health.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So typically you shouldn't find yourself having too much water. And that's why you probably don't see a lot of people who have that issue. People typically don't get thirsty. They're like, well, I don't sweat or I'm not thirsty, right? But we should still do our best to try to consume water throughout the day, because even though you might not feel that you're sweating it out, right? You could still be losing water through whatever activity, right? So that's what I would suggest if people are feeling like, well, I don't need water. Just it's very hard to judge how much water you need, but it's never bad to go have excess water. Let's put it that way. Right? It's far easier to be dehydrated than to be hydrated, because one thing that the body sometimes has a hard time interpreting is, am I hungry or am I thirsty?
Yes.
Right? Though the brain has a hard time realizing which one it is. So sometimes you might feel like you're hungry, but you're actually thirsty.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So,
I remember. Yeah, actually, there's so much to say. But I guess very quickly, actually, I'll share. I was a vegan for 6 months. I lasted 6 months with that lifestyle. And that's where I learned about the different cues of my body, actually. I learned what hunger actually felt like and what did thirst actually feel like. And most
Right.
often for myself, it was thirsty and then it wasn't hunger, which is great because I even learned just how much time goes into cooking that could be going into something else too, right? So it's like, okay, if I can drink water and keep my body flowing and efficient in what it already possessed, then that's great. Then I guess, yeah, just building something else. But yeah, you're right. That I just it sparked that memory to me. I'm like, oh, I did not, because I thought I knew. Like, I'm thirsty, my mouth is itchy,
No, you're right. Definitely. Typically, when you are thirsty, that really means that you have not had a lot of water at all, right? Like
Right.
like your body's like, okay, now I need water, kind of thing. And like
Yeah.
there's like certain cues. I mean, like your lips get dry. For instance, and like actually one thing good to know about water is that like why it's actually even important, especially when you're working out, is because you also need that water for recovery, right? Like you can't recover if you don't have enough hydration in you, right? If you're not properly hydrated, you won't recover, and that means that when you go to work out the next time, you're not performing as well as you want to be, right? Your muscles will be sore. You wake up, you're tired, you're stiff, right? These all can sometimes be attributed to lack of having enough hydration in your system.
Again, interesting point.
Yeah.
And yeah, let's continue because I have so much more I could say about the one seed, but yes.
um, so when I talk about the three pillars of good health, what I'm looking at is nutrition, rest, and fitness, right? So nutrition in terms of we should be eating a wide variety of food, right? Opt for the non-processed foods whenever possible, right? Whether you like cooking or not, like over processed foods just will. Now, I hesitate to say this, but I mean, there's a reason why when you have a bag of chips, you can't stop at just one, right? So there's something when they're processing this food that turns off something in your brain to say stop eating, right? And I'll give you a perfect example. If you have a steak, you get full and your body says I'm full, right? I'm talking calorie for calorie. Like if you're to put down the amount of cookies that it would be or amount of chips to equal that steak, you could probably eat bags and bags of chips for some people, and your body still wouldn't say you're full, right? Because a lot of these foods are broken down in a sense, and they make them almost like pre-digestible. So it's like they're easy to digest, and your body just does not know when to stop, right? As opposed to like, okay, well, I'm going to eat broccoli or I'm going to eat um, watermelon or whatever fruit, like, and you find okay, I'm full. I cannot just not have any more, right? The second thing is rest. You should be aiming, especially when you're training, for 7 to 9 hours of sleep. And the reason why we do this is because those gains in that training that you're doing don't occur until you're actually resting. That's when you're making the gains. So when people want to lose weight, you're not losing the weight when you're at the gym. You're losing weight when you're resting. That's really when that's when you're losing the most weight. And that's when you're gaining the most muscle, right? It's when you're at rest. Because when you're resting, this is when the recovery is happening and when the body is now processing what has been done in a day, right? It's almost, if we want to look at it in terms of say you're studying, right? Studies have shown that you study better when you have rested because your body absorbs that information that you've studied, and it processes it and it imprints it on the brain, right? And that's why when you're cramming, you're not really that information isn't imprinted on the brain as easy as it is when you've actually had rest. Okay, so rest is ultra important. Okay, and then obviously fitness, and like all three of these things are important. You take one away from the triangle, right? It means that you're not going to get the gains that you're looking for, right? Whatever that goal was, you want to add all three of these. And you could probably even add another one, which is reduction of stress, right? But for these three pillars of good health, you're looking at nutrition, rest, and fitness, right? Whatever that fitness is, it doesn't matter what it is. Even if it means you going out and walking the dog, every day of the week, having a brisk walk, or whether it's you swimming or you riding, like all this amounts to you getting proper nutrition and proper rest. If your goal is to, if you have a specific goal in mind, right? Those are all important.
Yes, and I definitely agree with you. I think ultimately, not only summarizing this slide, but even throughout the information, it's everything requires moderation, right? If you're doing too much rest, then your body is not getting enough of fitness in whatever movement, right? Or maybe not enough nutrition.
Or too much nutrition. If you're having too much, this is what I talk about. Like so when you have overconsumption of calories, this is when you start adding weight, and like it's not just about the protein, the fat, or the carbs. It's any of it. Like if you have too much of anything, right?
Yes.
Your body's only need so much, and then any excess gets stored into adipose fat tissue, basically.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
A proper, presentation if I didn't talk about supplements. So there's lots of supplements you can have, right? Some of the ones that I think are of note are vitamin D. And vitamin D is because it's anti-inflammatory, right? And that's really important because it's also associated with muscular strength. So in terms of, when you have lack of vitamin D, you're not as strong. Like your grip strength, for instance, is not as strong. It really is going to mean declining health for you. And why vitamin D is also important is because we're north of the equator, right? So when people are like, okay, I'm going to go out and get some sun, we need to understand that vitamin D gets converted from the sun hitting your skin, right? So now there are different types of ultraviolet rays, and the type of ultraviolet ray that we need to convert vitamin D is ultraviolet ray B. So when you don't get that, we're not really converting the nutrients in our body to vitamin D, right? And the problem is that you only really get that ultraviolet ray B between the months of like late April to August. And then anytime during that, even though it's sunny outside, it won't convert it. So when you're out on a winter day and it's bright outside and you're like, oh, I'll get a little vitamin D. You're not getting vitamin D. Okay? Like if you're closer to the equator or you're south of it, then sure, that's fine. Then you would be getting it. But that's why when we're like in places like Canada and like these northern hemisphere countries, or whether provinces or states, supplementing vitamin D is actually pretty important, especially in the winter months. Now our bodies can store vitamin D in the summer and in those months that we're converting it, but we deplete it over time, right? Another one would be creatine monohydrate. So creatine actually has been shown to be very good. It's very safe to take. But what we want to do is most on the directions, it will typically say, take 5 milligrams of creatine, every day. So that is usually based on somebody who is about 180 pounds or whatever, right? So If you're lower than, if your weight is lower than the 180 that, most of these, these direct, suggested values are based on, you should probably take less. So I would say anywhere between 3 to 5 milligrams of creatine powder is what you're aiming for if you choose to take it. Okay. Protein powder. Now, there's the idea that protein powder, whether it's based from an animal source, so milk or whey, or a non-animal source, is it still good? I mean, in terms of protein, they've already created so that basically one scoop is going to be equal to this amount of protein. So protein powder is not a bad thing. You can definitely take it if you want. And whether you take a animal-based one or a non-animal-based one, it's fine.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sean. Truly.
Yeah.
Like as you're talking, that there's just so much to say, especially with vitamin D. And if you live in Canada, as you said, and now we're entering winter. So vitamin D is less. People of color, right? We need
Absorb it. Yeah.
Yes, off
Yeah.
of vitamin D. So really being so mindful of your nutrition and again your supplements in particular during this time, right? I have a question that I want
Definitely.
to ask you. I do think it might be more related to mental health, but it's what came up for me. So I'm curious, with having a nutritional plan, for example, right? How do you avoid rigidity yet stay organized towards your goals? Because I know when we tap into rigidity, it can become disorderly.
Well, the way I look at it is this: we have to look at any food that we eat as energy, right? So if you look at food as energy, then you'll find that there isn't, then that rigidity shouldn't be there. You should be able to eat what you want. It comes back to like what we're saying. It's moderation, right? Moderation and variety, right? That's what we're aiming for, really, when we're talking about creating a balanced nutrition plan, right? We don't ever want to feel that we're handcuffed to what we're eating, because then there's that lack of motivation, or there's that negative feedback that we get when we're thinking about, okay, what am I going to eat? Oh, great, I have to eat chicken again. You can have whatever you want, right? Like, but it's about moderation, and it's like aligning what your goal is, right? You can eat anything you want, but you have to say, what am I trying to attain, right? Now, if my goal is to, cut weight, because I just use cut weight because a lot of people are interested in fat loss, or weight loss, right? Or weight management. Then having fatty foods, having non-lean meats, probably is not the best thing for us. Doesn't mean that we completely cut it out of our system, but if we find that we're always having a steak, right, then that's probably not a good thing for us, right? If we find that we're only having processed meals, like the Hungry Man meals, that the frozen dinners, right, that were very popular back years ago. I'm not sure how popular they are now. I'm sure people still use them, but I mean, growing up, I know, you couldn't watch TV and not see a commercial about talking about like some Hungry Man meal, right? Having these are not going to be good for you over the long term, right? And that's another thing that we need to understand. It's moderation and realizing that it takes a while for our body to adjust to anything, right? You gaining weight doesn't happen in 1 week of eating, right? It's over the long course of term, over the long course of time, basically.
Okay, thank you. And I agree. It's that mindfulness of moderation, right? And even reframing the mind of understanding what you are doing, having the information of what you need within your life, and it's not necessarily bad or good. It's definitely not about bad or good. It's about moderation and then doing things within your goal for your lifestyle.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we close, is there any closing remarks that you want to share, Sean? Or
I mean, I'll just reiterate that variety And variety is probably the key to life, honestly. Whether it's how you train, how you eat, whatever you do, like your friends, your activities, your hobbies, whatever you do, that is what's going to lead you to having a full life. And it's what's going to keep you motivated. That's really what it comes down to. When we don't add that spice to our life, then we are going to feel bored. We're not going to have that same motivation, right? And creating goals, and while it might seem like it's like, oh man, I have to create goals, creating goals is going to keep us in line with what we're trying to achieve, right? It's really, people might look at it like it's a lot of work. It's not a lot of work. It actually helps you do less work when you think about it, because if you keep to your goal and you realize that's what your goal is and you have a plan, then that means that when you veer off, you're not wasting energy when you're veering off to come back onto that plan, right? So that's what I would say.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. And I think for those that are starting their nutritional journey or just want to continue this conversation, it might feel hard actually to start it by yourself. Please feel free to reach out to One Piece Therapy. We'll be happy to schedule you with Sean. Again, thank you so much for your knowledge and your examples. I personally have gained a lot. Those that are watching, please feel free to ask us questions as well, and take care.
Have a great day, everyone. Thanks a lot.